Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependent Dummy podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. Now, in your 20s, you're finding yourself exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in shit relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. Codependency is a way of being where we put the feelings, wants, and needs of others above our own in an unconscious attempt to meet our own feelings, wants, and needs. Sorry to break it to you, sis, but that is not sustainable. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. Let's get to it. Oh, hello, everyone. Today we have Pam Goodbois. She is a recovering therapist, a self-development and business coach, and the host of the Out of Your Mind podcast, a place for entrepreneurs to come together, gain insight, and be inspired to write a story of connection, joy, and passion. Good to have you, Pam.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. So typically, I start with hearing how you conceptualize codependency, but I wanted to ask, what's a recovering therapist? And is there like a 12-step group I might be attending someday?
Might be something to be involved in. Yeah. So I kind of joke often that I'm a recovering therapist. I had a private practice for 13 years. I was a therapist for over 20 and ended up closing my practice mostly because it just was not feeling in alignment with me anymore. But another big thing was I had a health crisis. And so there is a lot when you shift from something like that. There is a lot, like in the 12-step programs, like being a recovering alcoholic or something along those lines. There is a process that you have to go through to disconnect from that world. Like for a long, I found myself like giving my kid therapy, my husband therapy, everybody that came into my life, like that component was missing. And I had to recognize that that was that's old behaviors and I need to stop that because they don't serve me. So yeah, it's been a journey for sure to make that shift, really, because I just needed to for my own physical, emotional, and spiritual health.
Right. Okay, one more question.
Yeah.
What was out of alignment?
For me, I loved being a therapist. I was a therapist, obviously, for a long time, and I loved the work that I was doing. But what was happening and what kind of started to put it out of alignment, and I started to shift into burnout and really kind of like a chronic burnout was I was no longer, I'm somebody that needs to be challenged, first of all. If I'm not challenged, I kind of like a flower on a windowsill, I wither and die. And, and it was no longer a challenge for me. And I just felt like how I realized I was out of alignment is that I was not showing up as the best version of myself for my clients. They needed me to be the person that I was, and I was no longer that person. And a lot of that realization and the recognition that I was out of alignment came when I went into a full heart block and my heart stopped working and I have no electrical impulse to my heart anymore. And I have a pacemaker. And it was like, I was like, oh, something larger than me is telling me that I need to get off this path. This is a very clear indication for me that something has to shift. And so it was some of that. It was some of realizing that and getting clear on that. And then I just recognized, I didn't realize in it that I was out of alignment. I realized connecting the dots after. I was like, oh man, I am not in alignment. That's what the issue is. That's where I'm at. That's where the struggle is.
Wow.
Yeah.
And do you sense any aspects of codependency played a role in the burnout?
It's possible. I think the interesting thing about codependency, right, is that we recognize as human beings, right? Like there's a codependency, a people component of codependency. But I think there can also be a codependency to like ideas, ideals, and beliefs about ourselves, right? So,
Yes.
so this story that like, what am I? This is because this is part of the work of like the recovering, right? What am I if I'm not a therapist anymore? And when you've been doing that work, I mean, I was a therapist. I was a college professor teaching in the social work department. I was immersed in this culture of therapists. Right. My husband is a therapist. All of our friends are therapists. Yeah.
It didn't stop.
Right. It didn't stop. And so there is definitely, I think, a component when I look at my story of I wouldn't like classically say like I'm codependent on other people, but I definitely was codependent on the beliefs and the stories and the ideas and of who I was, and who I was a therapist. And I was a therapist in every relationship in my life, including, I'm the youngest of 4, and including my relationship with my mom, where to this day, she'll say, I know I shouldn't put this on you, but like, I feel like you're the only one that understands. And I'm like, right, because I'm the therapist. Like, yes, I am the only one that understands. I get that.
Right.
But there's this component of like, I think this is like happening in current time, this process.
Yeah.
I think that, oh my God, I'm going to throw up. My value as a human being came from being of service to other people. And I have been dependent on that my whole life.
Right.
Oh, that's like pukey. Okay. Like, all right, realization bubbles to the surface. Love when that happens. Yeah.
I'm nodding my head because I completely relate. And I was on your podcast and talked about the back. Oh gosh, I forget how I describe it now, but it's like back breaking, bone cracking work I did. And yeah, it really was my body literally breaking down and me having to discern, oh, I can't remain in this mental health, community mental health position. But I'm a good person because I'm here, right? Aren't I a good person because of all the backbreaking, bone shattering work I'm doing? Yeah. So to leave, and I remember I was at a group practice for a short amount of time, and I like thought about leaving, just little hints and whispers of leaving, and I was like, I can't leave these patients. I can't leave the identity I've created here as this loyal, available therapist. And I thought like, I'll just have to wait till I'm pregnant. like I'm going to need some huge life change to leave.
Yeah. That's what I did when I worked in community mental health. I left because I got pregnant. Well, I left when I went into labor early. Wow, there's another dot that I'm connecting. And I left, and it was like, I remember going into labor. I mean, it was 9 weeks early, and she's good. She's healthy. She's 13. She's full grown. We're all good there. But I remember going into labor 9 weeks early and thinking, oh my God, what are my clients going to do?
Wow.
Like they all knew, obviously I was pregnant. I was very pregnant. They knew, they recognized that this was happening. We're moving in that direction, but it was 9, like I hadn't even done any transitional planning, nothing, that in the world of working in mental health, you do all of that stuff. You don't just disappear. Right. And so, I'm realizing that. And then my health crisis last year, was the same kind of thing, like where I just kind of disappeared. I was in the ER, like texting my clients, I'm sorry, I have to cancel our appointment this week. Wow. And so it's funny when you talk about that, like the identity and the connection and the like, what will these people do without me? Like, holy cow. Yeah. I feel like when we're in the helping fields, we do that often. I hear women say that all the time. I hear yoga teachers say it. I hear therapists say it. I couldn't possibly
nurses.
What would my people, whoever they are,
Right.
do without me? I feel bad leaving because it's why I've never left anything until there's been a crisis. Holy shit. Ooh, sorry. Sorry.
We can cuss here.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
But that, like, wow. Yeah. It's not a
Mhm.
connection it's something that I realized, but it wasn't a connection that I made from a codependency perspective until just now.
Right.
Different lens.
Different lens. This is a lens. So speaking of lens, how do you conceptualize, conceive, define codependency?
So I don't know that I've ever thought about like a definition. When I think of definitions, I'm always like, what is the dictionary? I'm like, let me Google that. Let's see what the dictionary says. When I think about codependency, what comes up for me is a disconnected, overwhelming, dysfunctional need to be in a role or a relationship or perceived in a way
Right.
that is going to get me or get any of us like what we what we want, what we desire, what we need from a subconscious place.
Right.
So we're not walking, it's not like, oh, I need you to see me this way so that you can put money in my bank account or whatever, right? It's not like so much a conscious story. It's more like the subconscious, like me being a therapist to all my friends so they'll like me.
Right.
Yeah. And obviously that was, a need to feel connected. I need to feel like I was worthy enough to be connected to. That was a subconscious process for sure.
Disconnected, overwhelming, dysfunctional need to be in a role, a relationship, perceived in a way. I love that, right? Because we're just it's all about others' perception of us. Yeah, perceived in a way that will get me what I want. Right, subconscious, and this need for either, to feel connected and then worthy of connection.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we want. That's what we all, like I say, what I want, what we all want is we want to be seen, heard, valued, and loved.
Right. So some people do it, I don't know, X amount of way. And then we do it in this codependent route where we literally let me just insert myself into your thoughts and needs in hopes that will fulfill my own thoughts and needs rather than prioritize mine. If I prioritize yours, eventually.
Isn't that like every therapist on the planet? Man, we're a mess.
We are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked about some aspects of codependency in your life. Any other examples? Most listeners are young women. Any examples you can share with us? Other examples?
Yeah. I'm sure there's thousands upon thousands, right? And I think back to like early relationships in my life, like young adulthood, right? That time frame, like went off to college and the friends and the connections and the boyfriends and the dating or all of that stuff. And I was at a college party and I wasn't a drinker. I'm like allergic to everything. I'm allergic to like there's so many like gluten and all the things. So, even at that time, even though I didn't have a diagnosis, I knew that like consuming beer made me feel sick. So I didn't drink often at college parties. Not that I think that anybody that if you're underage, you should be drinking at college parties. Just put that little stamp on there. But I was at this party and it was at a frat and they were two frats across the street from each other. And some guy comes running into the house that I'm in and he's like, is anybody sober? And I was like, yeah. And he said, my friend just tried to open a beer bottle by biting the top off of it. And the bottle shattered in his mouth and he was like gushing blood. And we need somebody to drive us to the hospital. I'm like a freshman in college. I don't know these people. It was probably like September or October of my freshman year. I had not like, and I was like, okay. So I like hop in his car. I don't even know whose car it was. Drive them up to the hospital. And I sat outside the ER for 2.5 hours in the car. And then I was like, I went to school in like a small town. And although the hospital is a little bit further away, it's walkable. It's not like the end of the world to walk home, or he probably could have called somebody to come pick him up, right? I was like, I'm not waiting here anymore. Like I had this, like, this is dumb. I'm not doing this. And so I drove, I didn't even know whose car it was. So I like left the keys, like put the keys in the visor and like left it in the driveway where I drove the car from. And looking back, I'm like, wow, that was a desperate, like, sure, there's like I'm a kind person and I'll do these things, but like after the fact, I remember being like, those jerks, they didn't know my name. They didn't say thank you. Like, so there was a story there in my own head that like, when I do things, if I do this thing for you, then I should be getting something in return. Right.
Right.
And if that's not codependency, I don't know what is.
Right.
And, so like, I remember, and there have been so many incidents in my life being the like wanting to be the good person, wanting to show up and be of value and not getting the need met on the other end. And I could probably go through my life and name, I don't know, 2,000-3,000 times where that happened.
Right.
And the resentment would build and so then I would start rejecting people and all that whole dynamic would start of like, I'm going to hate you before you hate me because I'm afraid that that's what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what was it like sitting in that car for 2.5 hours? Like, should I stay or should I go?
Like, yeah. And I was like, I dropped them off. So it was a small, like the town I went to school in, the university, like when the university arrived in the fall, we doubled the size of the town.
Wow.
And it wasn't a big school. So it was like a town of 4,000 that became a town of 8,000. So the little hospital that was in town actually had a student, like, this is where the students go in. This is like your thing. So that's where I dropped them off. And so I sat there and waited, but it's like 1 o'clock in the, I don't know what time it was, middle of the night.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there and I'm like, there's nobody. Like, they didn't go in that way. They walked around. And there was never a conversation of like what's expected. So I kept being like, if I leave, are they going to like come out right after I leave? And I don't want to like abandon them, but like, also, do I go in? Like, I don't even know their names. I don't even know who they are. Like, I don't know these people. I said in one of my podcast episodes, I told this story and I was like, so if you're listening, ring me up, because I'm curious what you're doing these days. If you're still doing dumb things like biting beer bottles. And so I like moved the car, drove around to the other side, moved over here, moved over there, I drove around a couple times. And then I was like, do I leave? And at one point I pulled out, and then I was like, I should not, because they've been in there for a while. We're probably going to get seen. It wasn't really busy. They're probably all right, let me go back. And so I did that a couple times, and not really having, I was 18 years old, maybe I might've been 17. And not really having an understanding of how like emergency rooms work or whatever any of that stuff looks like. And it's funny to me now because I've worked in EDs, I've worked in like psychiatric units in emergency rooms. I know exactly what the emergency room, how it functions now, but at the time I had no idea. So I'm like, do I go in? Do I not go in? Do I park the car? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And it was like, yeah, there was some agony to that. And I felt really, this is where the codependency is, right? I am not somebody who like sits in guilt very often. I felt really, really guilty for leaving.
Right.
Yeah. Even though there was no like conversation or like they didn't say, wait here and we'll be out and just don't leave without us. They were like, okay, cool. And like got out of the car. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that still stands out. And that was, 25 years ago or longer than that.
Right.
Yeah.
And just hearing the I can't abandon them.
Right.
And what if I leave and they come out and they'll negatively perceive me as some abandoning, mean person? So let me go back. And just all the mental gymnastics, I feel like you're describing this evening. And this is also me sending a text message, right? I'll type out a text. I'm like, no, and I'll delete it. And I'll add this and I'll add that. And then I'll add an exclamation point or an emoji. I'm just trying so hard. Yeah. What do you sense what was the inner dialogue? What were you trying to avoid?
Yeah. Rejection.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Right.
I mean, so we're always trying to avoid, I think, like across the board as human beings, what we work really diligently to avoid is feeling rejected. And so I say feeling rejected because it could be actual rejection or perceived rejection, right?
Right.
So it's our own inner world. Doesn't matter what anybody else is doing or saying. It's what's going on in our inner world. And yeah, that's what we're all trying to avoid. And I know without a doubt, that's what I was trying to avoid because it's what I always tried to avoid. Like, well, I don't want them to think this about me. I don't want them to think that about me. And how exhausting is that? And I'm so grateful that I'm now 45 years old and don't live in this space of my 18-year-old self anymore. Cause that was a lot. That was a lot.
Yeah. I mean,
probably,
yeah.
It was probably also my 13-year-old self was probably the same way as my 18-year-old self now that I think about it, but yeah.
Right.
God. And I think that for me, I've swung to the other end. Like, I'm like, I don't care. You don't like what I said? Okay. That's not my problem. Like, I think when you talk about like sending text messages and emails, I have to be aware that I'm not, because I'm not somebody, like, I'm not a person that's like, I don't come across in person as somebody that's like rigid or like, like just lay the law down and that's what it is. But oftentimes in written communication, because if you ask me a question, if you have a thing, if I have to say like, this isn't going to work, I just say this isn't going to work. And I often don't give people what they need in that scenario, or I have to really think about giving people what they need. And I think that that's a reaction to always thinking about other people, to being like, I'm not thinking about anybody, I'm just thinking about myself. And then I'm like, wait, okay, I should probably be a little gentler because it will help them. Like, I'm less worried about the impact or the perception of me in that scenario, but I do care about people. Like, I still do, like, I say all the time, I love people I love everyone for whether they give me reason to or not. And I do feel that way about other human beings. And so because of that, I'm like, I should probably start this email with, hi, how are you doing? Because isn't that what we do?
Yeah. It is a balance though, right? So living and existing so long on one codependent extreme, of course, it's hard to discern what a middle, undependent, interdependent, healthy, reciprocating relationship is. So then you go over to independent, screw you all, like, I'm gonna do me. And then there's dissatisfaction, lack of fulfillment over there. So like trying to learn, cultivate what that middle ground is.
And I feel like it's a dance because we're not dealing with machines, we're dealing with other humans. And, I have family and friends that, like, I have people that are in my life that I can be like, when they say, what are you doing this weekend? Because they want to get together. I say, I'm busy, I can't do this weekend. And then I cannot respond to them for 2 weeks and they know it's not personal. They know that it's just like Pam's doing her thing and she's got this other stuff going on, and I'm not going to. And then there are people in my life that are like, I haven't heard from you in 24 hours and I'm pretty sure you're dead and you don't love me anymore. And I'm like, okay. So I recognize that I need to put more effort in there, like checking in and staying connected, because that's really important to them. And so I think that there's this it's a constant dance, right? It's like, I've got to constantly, every time you engage in a new relationship and a new level of relationship with self. So we have gain a new understanding of yourself. And then, so it can be either side, right? You shift or they shift. You have to like learn new dance steps.
Right.
You're like, okay, what's the choreography here? I don't know that one.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So you coach, you help entrepreneurs. This actually isn't a good transition, so I'm just going to ask the next question.
Okay.
Well, in some of the content you sent me, I did like, and I'm curious about, why are you a firm believer that any relationship can be one of empowerment or codependency?
Yeah. Part of that, I think, part of my reasoning behind like essentially any relationship can be healthy or toxic, right? Like, and anywhere in the spectrum in the middle. And not to say that codependency is toxic, but like that we can be anywhere on that spectrum. And
Right.
So when we talk about empowerment versus codependency from a relationship standpoint, because we are always changing and evolving, and because relationships require us to put in effort, they require us to be aware, to be tuned in. And when we're not aware and we're not tuned in, it's very easy to kind of fall into old patterns. Or, an example of this, I'll give you an example because I'm like struggling to find the words to explain it, but I'll demonstrate with an example that I have a 13-year-old who loves to bake. And when she was 4 and she wanted to start baking, I had a friend that said to me, oh God, I couldn't even deal with my kid being in the kitchen baking. Everything takes so much longer. And I said, yeah, it does. It definitely takes so much longer. Everything is a project. The kitchen's a disaster when we're done. But I recognized that at that point, I had this opportunity to either empower her to recognize that she had the ability to do this. I mean, I have a stand mixer. It's not like you gotta like lock it and put the thing on. Like, you can do this. You can pour the ingredients in. I had a choice to empower her or to do it for her.
Right.
And I recognized that she was going to get a lot further if I empowered her.
Wow.
Than doing it for her. And now at 13, she's like started her own baking business.
Right. So empower or create or sustain dependency.
Yeah.
Right. How many times have my parents like come in to rescue me, which at the time I obviously was struggling and in need of support and aid. And yet, so many of my patients, so many of the listeners, I've heard that with the extremes, right, it can create codependency where it's just, okay, next crisis, 911, mom and dad, as opposed to, oh, I've dealt with something similar. Let me attempt to navigate this. Or
right. And it's ever evolving, right? In relationships, it's ever evolving. So when my daughter was like 7, I remember I would come downstairs and my husband would be like, literally, she'd be holding onto his shoulders and he'd be like helping her get dressed, holding her pants. And I would be like, she's 7. What are you doing? Like, why are you getting her dressed? I was just trying to help her. I'm like, are you trying to help her? Are you trying to do it for her? What's going on here? But even now at 13, with like homework. She'll be like, I don't understand how to do this. And what she's really saying is, can you just give me the answer? And I have to say, I'm not giving you the answer. And I'm not giving you the answer because I know that you are capable. I'll answer any questions you have. I'll help you problem solve it, but I'm not giving you the answer. And I think that we are quick to just seek the quick answer. If you just tell me, can I just Google it? Can I just get the quick answer instead of sitting with the discomfort of it? And so in our relationships as adults, if our tendency has been to seek the quick fix, the quick answer, to get somebody to just tell me, right? It's like getting the answers from the back of the math book that don't have any explanation on how you get there. And you can live life that way. You can Google everything. You can get the information that you need. But what happens when you have no service? Right? What happens when mom and dad aren't there when you need that, when you need to problem solve something? What happens when there's conflict in a relationship and you have to actually give yourself the space to process through your own inner story so that you can then communicate that to your partner or your friend or whoever you're having this conflict with? And so I think that I don't think relationships are either empowering or codependent. I think that we have components of both in all of them, and it's whatever we nurture. So if you nurture codependency, then that is going to be what shows up.
Right.
And the reason I say codependency versus dependency, because yes, when our kids are little, there's the dependency piece. But what I see over and over and over again is the codependency comes when I'm getting something because I'm giving you the answer. Therefore, I'm important in your life and you're never going to want to get rid of me. And it would be easy to do that, especially like at 13, right? Having a 13-year-old, like I keep hearing, you're on the precipice. She's going to hate you any minute. She's promising me that she'll never hate me, but we'll see what happens, right? And it would be very easy. And I see it with my husband because he's the one that she's like, Dad's so embarrassing. And so I see it with him that he'll like do anything to try to please her, to try to get her to like him. And I'm like, dude, she loves you. Like, don't worry about it. She'll come back.
Right.
It requires, in order to have an empowering and healthy relationship, it requires an element of trust.
Mm-hmm. And two, I want to, right. She asks, she's like, I don't want to do this, or like, I don't know how to do this. And right. It is a balance of potentially fostering codependency or empowerment. But here you are, you said you communicate through your actions. I know you are capable. And that's right from an empowerment side. So if it's, okay, let me look, here's the answer, right? Well, what's being conveyed underneath that?
Right. Yeah. The subconscious process there is like, I don't believe that you're capable, therefore I'll do it for you. Mm-hmm. Like that's the story that I'm telling her if I give her the answer. And I say that to her all the time. Like she's like, okay, mom, I get it. You're a therapist. I get it. I get where you come from. Cause I'll say, Marley, if I give you this answer, what I'm telling you is that I don't believe or trust that you're capable of solving problems on your own. And I do believe and trust that. And you don't want to feel that, right? You don't want to feel like I don't trust you or I don't think you're capable. And she's like, no, like, okay. And then she just does her work. Like she had a thing last night. She was writing some poem, something that she stopped doing. Like, she's like, I couldn't figure out that thing. So I didn't do it. And I was like, well, show it to me. What is it? So she pulls it out, and it's good because there's like an honesty at this point. In like 7th grade, there's some of the things that I'm like, I don't have any idea what you're doing. I don't remember that. I don't think we ever did that, whatever. And so she was writing an acrostic poem, and she was like, it's on this character from this book or story thing that we were doing. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know. Like, I can't help you. I'm like, what I can do is I can like look up the character and I can just read the description and see if that kind of jogs some of the things. And so that's what I did. And so I read through it, and she just like was like, oh, and she just like whipped him out. She's like, oh, I got one. Oh, I know what it is. Okay, I'm done. And I was like, see, You got this.
Mm.
And she always says to me, it's easier when I have a conversation with you about it. And I'm like, that's fine. I'm here to have a conversation with you about it.
Right.
That's fine. Because she's also communicating like, this is what I need from you. And so I'm like, and that's empowering too. When she can say, hey, I need this thing. And I say, hey, I'm here for you. Then that's demonstrating to her that because it's not just about like abandoning her, right? Like, when you think about, for your listeners that are thinking about like, how do I navigate this in a relationship? It's not about abandoning the other person and being like, you're on your own, because that's what's empowering. It's being able to say like, hey, I need you to communicate to me what you need so that I can then support you in whatever it is. That's healthy. That's not codependency. That's healthy. Wouldn't it be great if we could all do that?
Wouldn't it be great?
Yeah.
So codependent extreme, empowerment, collaboration, communication, somewhere in the middle.
Yep.
Yeah. We're not like talking about precision, everyone. You're not going to get it right every time. You're not trying to hit the bullseye, but just like landing in the middle, somewhere near that. Pam and I sense is a good spot to aim.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you and I are in a relationship and we're having a conversation and I have one opinion and you have another opinion, it's the same act of like, how do we, and it could be something as simple as, let's go to dinner. Okay, well, I want to go to Mexican. Well, I don't want Mexican. I want Chinese, right? And there's this back and forth. And then you're like, okay, well, is there a way that we could come together? Is there something that we could both agree on? And to not feel like, and maybe I say, you wanted Mexican and I wanted Chinese, but like, all right, I'm willing to go for Mexican. Maybe that's the compromise, but maybe the compromise is we go for Thai food instead, right? Like it doesn't matter what the two ends of the spectrum are or what's going on, whether it's in a relationship or with ourselves, right? Because so often we do the same. We have, our relationship with self is a relationship. And so we can kind of swing like, how do I work to nurture the beliefs about myself that are empowering?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do I nurture the beliefs about myself that are empowering? And you do help your clients with mindset.
Yes.
How does a codependent improve her mindset?
Yeah. Well, it begins with awareness. You have to like understand the story. You have to know what's going on, right? You have to know what's happening in the subconscious process, which is like which shows up in our actions. So I teach people how to like track their actions and notice like, this is what's going on. I keep doing the same thing. This behavior keeps showing up, whether it's in relation or whether it's in and everything's a relationship. So I'll say in relation, but in relation with another person, in relation with myself, in relation with my story or with money or with whatever, my business, whatever the case may be, right? Because they're all relationships. And so we recognize those things show up, right? Our stories show up, the patterns show up over and over and over in these relationships. And at some point we go, oh, I'm so sick of this pattern that keeps showing up, right? And we don't say it like that. We don't say, oh, I'm so sick of this pattern that keeps showing up and why do I keep doing this? We say, how come all the guys that I find are jerks? Right? That's the kind of stuff we say. How come how come I'm unlucky? How come, my friends always end up, nobody ever gives me money, whatever the thing is that I'm struggling with, it's always outside. It's always like this external locus of control, that there's this external factor that's being done to me.
Right.
And so what I teach people is one, to raise awareness to these things when these things arise. When you start saying things that the sentence could end with "to me." Why does this always happen to me? Why do people always treat me like this? So like to me, that is an indication that we're not taking responsibility for our own inner world.
Right.
Because our inner world, our story, our beliefs, our mindset, what happens in our head, it belongs to us. It doesn't belong to anybody else. And so why would we turn over the control of our inner world to somebody else? It makes no sense, right? Rationally, it makes no sense. And if you're listening and you're saying, oh yeah, I'd never do that, that's dumb, chances are you've done it. because we've all done it. Right. But it's not a conscious process. If we consciously said, oh man, I just keep turning over my own inner world to somebody else, to this person or that person, then we would stop doing it. But we don't say that. We say things like, you're lucky because you found a nice guy. The guy that I am dating is a jerk, and the last one was a jerk, and the last one before that is a jerk, and blah, 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 blah. Right. The story goes on and on and on. But so first we recognize that this is a pattern that shows up, and then we have the ability to do something about it. And the story that exists in our head, like everything we experience, all of our relationships, everything that happens outside of us is a direct result of what's going on inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens inside of us, we get to write. We get to decide. We get to write. You get to write your own story. Like every single one of us gets to take out a new notebook today and write a new story. The story that we want, the story that we desire, because we know that, right? We have an idea of like, what do I want? And oftentimes it comes in contrast, right? I don't want this, so therefore I must want this. That's fine.
Right.
I don't want somebody that treats me poorly. I want somebody that loves me unconditionally. Cool, write that down. And the mindset work is not it's not a one and done thing. It's not like, oh, now you're aware, now it's going to stop. It's recognizing with awareness that the stories that you're telling yourself that are showing up in your head are not of service to you. And we know they're not of service because of how they feel, right? So if we're walking around going, ooh, this feels yucky, chances are it's not of service to you. And when it is of service to you, it often makes you feel the emotions that you're seeking. So that could be peaceful, joyful, connected, right? The list can go on and on. We all have different things that we're seeking. But when we feel the way that we're wanting to feel more, chances are that story, that belief, that thought that's in our head is in alignment with that. And then the work becomes, how do I have more of those stories? And like, how do I find the balance? How do I start to decrease the stories that tell me I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, nobody's going to love me, and all the stuff that creates the patterns that we don't want, and how to replace them with the stories of like, I'm an empowered human being that gets to decide, gets to write the story, gets to decide who I allow to be in my life. And it can start with little things. It can start with like putting boundaries in place with somebody, right? So you have somebody that like maybe takes advantage of you or treats you poorly. Or I had this, I was speaking with a woman the other day, and she was like, she's a college student, I think she's 21, and one of her boyfriend's friends was like, hey, can you take me to the airport? And it's like he like treats her poorly all the time. She doesn't like him at all. And she was like, why would I drive him to the airport? Like, why would he ask me to drive him to the airport? And I was like, well, let's look at your story. And then she realized she had a friend that the only time she heard from her was when she needed a ride to the airport. And every single time this friend reached out and was like, hey, can you give me a ride and it started with, can you give me a ride to the airport? And then it became, hey, I'm flying out on this day at this time. Can you pick me up for that? Like, is that going to work in your schedule? Like it was already a given that she was going to drive her to the airport because that was her job. But now just like, hey, is this going to be convenient? Can we make it work? And if not, can you move the other thing? So when she realized that that was the story, and that she was like, oh, I get to decide. I don't have to say yes to this guy just because it's going to make me feel like kind to do it, because it actually makes me feel resentful to do it. And so recognizing those types of things, that like, you get to just decide, you can just put a boundary in place and say, no, I'm sorry. I'm not driving you to the airport. And the number one rule that I have with like boundary setting is don't make excuses, because it's inauthentic and it breeds codependency. So when you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm busy, I'm really sorry, I wish I could, right? And you like lament over how, you're saying I'm a bad person because I can't meet your need, when really you're making the choice to do this because it's not in alignment for you. So you just say, no, I'm sorry, I can't bring you to the airport. I go a step further because that's where I am in life. And I say, oh, I'm sorry. That's not a role that I'm willing to fulfill. Like, I'm sorry. We're not on that level. You're not a drive to the airport kind of friend.
Right.
I'm not driving into, an hour and a half into Boston to, I will pick my mother up at the airport. It's about the extent of it. Husband sometimes.
Right.
But there is a component of like, it's important to put a boundary in place and say, hey, and that's a really simple way, a straightforward way that you can start to empower yourself a little bit more and start to shift the inner dialogue. Because first you have to recognize, like, this is ridiculous and I don't want to do it.
Right.
And then you say, no, I'm not doing it.
So going back to the formula, first awareness, the patterns, the question could have been, why is everyone always asking me to take them to the airport?
Yes.
Am I like a driving service? You're like, oh, pattern.
Right.
So you help build awareness, right? Track actions. What patterns and relationships are they getting into? And then notice the ones that are, like you said, like icky or misaligned, causing resentment.
Yep.
And the mindset work is taking action to combat.
Yeah. So the mindset work is like embracing the story that you want. Right. So one of the things that I have the women that I work with do, because I work mostly with women, is I ask them to write the story. I ask them to look at contrast. So I will say, like, let's talk whatever we're talking about, right? Let's look at the story from your childhood around success or love or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then, like, how does that show up? And what is your, we pick out the pattern. And then I ask them to write the story that they would like this to be in their life. What would you like your story of success to be? Like, if you could write a new story of success or love or, whatever other things, peace, connection, right? What would that story look like? And I actually ask them to just pen it. I'm like, just get a notebook. Doesn't matter about your writing skills, and just write what that story looks like. And then I want you to compare the two. Mm-hmm. Because so often we think we are, we don't realize where we are. So if there's a continuum, we don't know where we are on that continuum. And so we think those of us that are really far away from what we want have a tendency to think we're closer. And those of us that are pretty close have a tendency to think we're way farther away. There's like this thing that happens in our brain. And so I ask them to get like really clear on what their current experience is and what they want their tomorrow experience to be. Wow. And then you can start to nurture. I mean, mindset work is like awareness, deciding to make a change, right? So committing to the change. And then, like, what is the change? Well, if I want to feel more connected, what do I need to do to feel more connected? Who do I want to feel connected to? Do I want to feel connected with myself? What does that look like? Right. Do I want to feel connected with my mom, with my significant other, with my best friend, with my children, whatever? It doesn't matter. The other person in the equation doesn't matter. It's more just like deciding, like, what is that going to look like? What do I want that to look like? And then to start to describe it as not what do I want, but this is what I have, right? I am connected to this person. I am connected to myself. And these are the things that I do to nurture that connection. I am connected to my mom, my dad, my cousin, my brother, my spouse, my whatever. Best friend. What am I doing? And these are the things that I'm doing to nurture that. And then when things that don't fit into that show up, you're like, whoa. Yeah, so I'm not doing that. That's not in my wheelhouse. And then you just throw a boundary in place and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, no. Right. Can't do it.
And going back to your definition of codependency, right? Some random ass friend of my boyfriend's, I'm this person, asks me, hey, will you take me to the airport? And all of a sudden, right, I am a functioning codependent, but yeah, I'm like, and there's this disconnected, overwhelming, dysfunctional need to be in a role for him, in a relationship with him, perceived in a way by him to get me what I want, which is connected. I want connection, but I only know how to get it through other people initiating, right? This unconscious seeking of connection. And you're like, let's bring awareness. Let's look at the patterns. Let's rewrite this story. Like, what does connection look like for you? And then consciously seeking that.
Yes. Yeah, because I mean, why would you be like, if you got your boyfriend's friend who treats you like crap, who you don't actually really like, and you look at that definition of codependency, and then you look at, you've already carved out what you desire. What? There's like, if you said yes, it would be like, what am I doing? Why?
Right.
Like, I'm not even on my path anymore. Like, what's going on here? And that, I mean, that happens. Sometimes we fall back into old patterns. We go, okay, yeah, I'll drive you to the airport. And then we notice that we shrink. You know, that feeling of being like, here I am. And then you're like, okay, fine, I'll do the thing. And it will show up. And it'll show up when we least expect it, right? Like if you have issues in relationships with men, for instance, if you're a woman, you have issues in relationships with men, and you perceive, and the story that you've been told, and this is her story that you've been told is that like men are right. Because you're not a man, you're wrong. You might find the impulse, even though you know all these other things and you know what your definition of connection is and you know what your desire and you're working in those directions, you might find in that instance the impulse to say yes, or you might even say yes and drive him to the airport. It doesn't make you a bad person. It's not something to beat yourself up over. It's a recognition that like, wow, I wonder what that story is all about. Like, if this is so out of alignment with the work that I'm doing, why did I say yes? Like, where's this coming from? Mm-hmm. And as we know, with the brain and all the things, subconscious process, it can come from thousands of different places. But it's our job to go like, what is that all about? And you might say, actually, it's my boyfriend's best friend. And he's felt my boyfriend's been a little bit distant recently. And so maybe I was driving his best friend to the airport, who I can't stand, as a means of trying to like be somehow connected to my boyfriend.
Right.
Or maybe something else. Right.
Right. How can I, and thus like with that awareness, how can I do that more consciously? So it's this roundabout, codependent,
exhausting.
Oh my God.
It's so exhausting. Like, so, I mean, just think about the amount of mental energy it takes to do all of that, all the codependency stuff, versus going down the road and having this big story and all the things, versus somebody saying to you, hey, can you drive me to the airport? And you're like, no. And then you move on. Right. But it's hard to get there. It's not easy work to get there. It's not,
no,
you know, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh man, I wish it were that easy for me. It can be. Right. That's the other thing I think that I would like to say is that it can be that easy, because it wasn't always that easy for me either.
No. Right. You said earlier, you're like at 45.
Yeah. I figured it out kind of.
Mm-hmm.
That component of my life anyway.
Yeah.
But I will say that there are still people that I come across, and it tends to be like, I'm a yoga teacher as well. So it tends to be like, and from a traditional perspective, like my teacher is like a big teacher. I'm super close to him. We're really good friends. And he's got this world of like male yoga teachers that are part of his world. Right. And there have definitely been times in my journey that I've met one of them at like a festival. And I'm like, this is like a famous yogi. And so I'm going to do whatever the famous yogi wants me to do so that the famous yogi will like me.
Right.
And then I catch myself and I'm like, oh my God, there's that old pattern again. Yikes. And my conscious brain is like, I don't actually care what this person thinks of me, but there's still like the traces of the subconscious story that are like, oh, it's a famous person. You better get that person to like you.
Mm-hmm.
Or else, I don't know what the or else is anymore, but there's still
rejection. He'll reject you.
Yeah.
And he'll somehow get back to your yoga teacher and he'll reject you too. Right. Just be a cascade of rejection.
Yeah. Yeah, probably. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's Yeah, that's probably exactly what it is. And
oh my God. Yeah.
it's just such a fascinating, we are so fascinating human beings, the way the brain works. Yeah. So interesting.
Yeah. My
Beautiful.
stories definitely are like, oh no, but if this person catches wind that I sent this email or text, I keep on talking about my correspondence, but yeah, then they'll tell this network of people how rude I was, and I will shrivel and die and just be rejected by the whole world because of this email.
It's so funny that you just said that, because it wasn't until that moment that I thought that in my curt emails that somehow could impact me negatively from a larger frame.
That's great. That's a good thing. I was like,
huh, interesting. Yeah.
That's the healing. You're just talking to one person. You're not trying to please them and the 5 people in your mutual circle.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And so often, I mean, for most of us, right, if we're out there being our authentic, genuine, caring selves, we can get out of our own way, because that's the stuff that gets in the way of that, right? Is we're stuck in our heads, or we're in our own way. We sit quietly or withdraw or disconnect because we're afraid of what the other people are going to think. I have a funny story about that. I'll tell that in a second. So often we have this, like, I have this story going on and I feel disconnected and all these things. But if you just showed up as the authentic version of you, and you just stood comfortably in who that was, and you interacted with people from a place of compassion, which I think is truly what we all want. We just are afraid of what the outcome is going to be if we act that way. That when you do that, and in my experience, when I do that, people are like, oh my God, you're so amazing. Like, that's what people, because it's like you say to my 13-year-old, she's like, I have a pimple. And I'm like, nobody cares. They only care about their own pimples, right? We don't understand that at 13, but that's the reality throughout our entire lives. If we can just show up as ourselves and embrace that and love ourselves enough and love the world around us enough, which is, we love to the degree in which we can love ourselves, because everything's just a mirror. Mm-hmm. Then people are able to see authentically who you are. And I was just on a call with somebody that, like, I met at a networking thing, and she was like, oh my God, I have a girlfriend that wants to do this thing, and she needs to talk to you because she's stuck in her own head and she needs you. And I was like, oh, cool. Happy to chat with her. And it's because I would love to see every human being achieve their greatest potential, because I think we're all capable of amazing things. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's why I'm like, I'd be happy to chat with her. Sure. Yeah. Because, but that funny story that I was just going to tell you. What was I saying? Because I don't remember now.
It was a funny story about being your authentic self, your 13-year-old's pimple, people thinking you're amazing because you're authentic.
I gotta trace back through my brain. ADHD. I know it's there. It's like on the tip of my brain. Like, how's your brain? It's good. It's good. Authentic self, showing up as me.
Change our stories.
God. It's like I want to rewind what we just did so I can watch it again. It will click. Huh. Yeah, now that area of my brain's shutting down, I can feel it going. You're not getting that story. No funny stories for you. He'll come back. Okay, let's just talk about the next thing and we'll come back. Because that's what my brain does.
Well,
It's lovely little things.
I am curious what you're offering the listener.
I'm offering the listener, like in life.
Your 30-day abundance and manifestation challenge.
Yes. I'm like, what am I offering? So one of the big shifts for me came probably 5 or so years ago. I just had this aha moment where I was in a yoga training, and in the yoga training, like in the world of yoga, we're always like just drawing and attracting everything that you want. And I was, my child was little, so it was more than a few years ago. And I've been a yoga teacher for a long time. So it was a decade ago. Wow. Gotta love when you do that. You're like 2 years ago or 10. I was working in a very small group practice as a therapist, and I had just like a handful of clients, and we had been struggling with like insurance reimbursements were just not coming in. And so I was stressed about money and the beginning of the year. So like, if you're a therapist, you accept insurance. It's always like deductibles beginning of the year, right? And so the insurance company's not paying, you have to depend on your clients to pay. And then there's like this gap in like you getting paid. And so I think it was February. I was in a yoga training, and our mortgage was coming due. It might've been like going into March. So like still close to the beginning of the year, our mortgage payment was coming due. And I was like, oh my God, we don't have the money in the bank account to pay the mortgage payment. So I guess it's just gonna have to be late. I'm not really sure what we're gonna do, but we'll like,
wow.
And I'm sitting in the yoga training, and somebody was talking about just like trusting that there's something larger than you that has got you, like that the universe has your back. And I was like, and to turn over any worries. This is what we were sitting like, just turn over any worries you have. And I was sitting there in meditation, and I'm like, I am just going to turn over the money worry because I don't want to worry about it anymore. And I'm just going to trust that something larger than me is going to make this work. And in the middle of the day, I got a text message from my husband. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, but bonuses come out on Friday. And it was like Tuesday, because I was like down in Boston at an intensive. And I was like, how much is your bonus? And he told me the amount, and it was the amount of our mortgage.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, I'm listening. And so then from there, I started being like, I can manifest. I remember growing up, it's like a little side tangent. I remember growing up, my mom had this very dear friend, still has this very dear friend, that always, who would go every Friday night to the food court at the mall, and all my parents' friends everybody would go, and then everybody could get whatever they wanted for food, and we'd all sit together, and it was like, it was their way of going out on Friday night together. And we would get to the mall, and my mom's friend Pauline would always be parked like in front of the door. And my mom was like, oh, she's always so lucky when it comes to parking. Like there's Pauline's car. She always gets front row parking. And so it started to become like a thing. I started driving, and I was like, I'm gonna get front row parking. And sometimes I would, sometimes I wouldn't. And then after I had this experience in yoga training, I was like, oh my gosh, what if Pauline is just manifesting her parking spot? Maybe that's what she's doing. Maybe she just knows without a doubt that she's going to get a front row spot. So she does.
Right.
So I started testing this theory out. I'm like, what would happen if I just decide that I'm going to get a front row parking spot? No matter where I go, doesn't matter what it is. All I have to do is take a few deep breaths, focus on it, and the spot will appear. And so I started doing that at like the mall at Christmas time, crazy. You can't find a parking spot at the mall. And I would get parking spot over and over and over again, everywhere we go. You'd go out to dinner in downtown, all parallel parking, which is not my favorite. And I would be like, there's one section that has angled in parking. And I would be like, I'm going to get a front row spot in the angled in parking. And I would get down there, and there'd be a front row spot in the angle. Somebody would be backing up, and I'd be like, there's a spot.
Wow. So
it became this thing like Pam can manifest parking spots. We'd go to the beach in the summertime, it'd be crazy, find a parking spot. And so this was the handful of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, pre-COVID, a holiday time pre-COVID, maybe 2018, we went to New York City, and we often go to New York City at the holidays. We're not that far from there, and we can drive. And as we drive into the city, and my daughter loves the city, like that city energy, and then like to come back home and be in the country, right? And so we went into New York City. We were staying like a block from Times Square. And my husband dropped us off at the hotel, dropped us off at front, got all of our stuff. And he's like, I'll go find parking. And so we check into the room, we go upstairs, we get all set. And like, I'm like, where is he? Christmas time, Times Square. And he calls me. I call him and I'm like, where are you? And he's like, I'm looking for parking. Have you been manifesting me a spot? And I was like, oh no. And he's like, I was like, I'm so sorry. I didn't even like, I was off on doing my own thing. And he's like, I've driven by these, you know, if you've never been to New York City, there's all these like little tiny parking lots between buildings that have like these little like elevators for cars. They're all this open structure with, and so they jam a bunch of cars into these little tiny spots. And he's like, everything's full. I can't find a spot anywhere, everything's full, everything's full. And I was like, where are you? And so he tells me where he is. And I'm like, okay. And so I visualize it because I know the area, right? Close my eyes and I take a deep breath and I'm like, all right, so it's done. And he's like, it's done. I'm like, it's done. And he's like, holy shit. Some guy just stepped out into the road and waved me into one of the parking lots. The sign says full, but he just waved me in. And I was like, and it was that moment that I was like, if I can manifest a parking spot in New York City at Christmas time in Times Square, I can do anything.
Wow.
And so I started like diving into the spiritual practice with, you know, the law of attraction and abundance and manifesting. And from that came this 30-day abundance manifestation challenge, which is like, you know, 10 or 15-minute little video clips each day for 30 days. And some people will do it in 30 days. Some people are like, it takes 45 days, or, you know, they space it out a little bit more.
Right.
There's some journaling practices. There's some meditation practices, all designed to create a mindset shift, because the mindset of abundance is the same as the mindset of growth and love and connection. It's the same. That's like the place we want to be, right? So abundance implies that there is plenty of everything, anything that you need, there is plenty of. And so, and all you have to do is decide that you want it and it will come to you. That's what the law of attraction says. And so, this 30-day challenge is like a practice. It's a mindset shift. It's a 30-day drastic mindset shift.
Wow.
So that you can go from, I'm stuck, I lack, I don't have enough, I can't do it, I'm not capable, I'm not smart enough, I'm not worthy of love, any of the things, and shift into like an embracing that, like that aha moment I had in New York City of like, man, I can do anything. All I have to do is decide that I want it in my life. And it has a couple of practices in it for manifesting. One for manifesting the relationship that you want to draw into your life. And it doesn't, like, I use that same manifestation practice to like attract the assistant that I wanted for my business, to attract my social media manager, to like, it doesn't have to be like a soulmate, but it could be, right? And practice to shift your mindset and attract the money that you want into your life. Like, so those are the two things that we always are like, if I could just have enough money to do the things, and if I could just have the relationships in my life then I would feel fulfilled. So that's the practice. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes I go back to it and I'll practice it myself, and I say things. I have a tendency to like, things will just come out of my mouth and then I don't remember, like earlier. And and I like go through this practice sometimes to like go back and rewatch and go through the 30 days again. And I'm like, wow, this is really powerful. Like, I just forget how powerful. And that's not like I'm so amazing, give me a gold star. No. It's more like, wow, this is, yeah, if we could all just embrace living from a space of abundance and recognizing that anything that we want, anything that we desire in life, and I don't mean need, I mean want. You can just say, I want I want this thing. I want this relationship. I want this connection. I want this resource. I want to buy my own house, not someday, but like, I want to buy my own house right now in this crazy market that we're in. I want to buy a new house, right? That you can, because everything that's around you will support you with doing that. And it's really just about getting into alignment. And the mindset's really important with that, because, if you say, or you think, for example, I want to buy a new house in this market and I want it to be this perfect house and I want all these things. And then you think, but I'm not really worthy of that. That blocks it.
Right.
It gets in the way.
Right. So addressing both.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm down. I'm game. And we'll put a link in the show notes.
Awesome.
As well as your contact info. And we'll have to have you back for that story.
I know. When I think what'll happen is I'll listen to the episode and I'll go, oh, that was the story. And then I'm going to write it down, because it was a funny story. It was like a quick, funny story, but I don't remember what it was now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, unconscious.
I know.
Your mysterious ways. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Pam.
Thank you.
And again, I will put links to the 30-day abundance manifestation challenge, and we will see you guys all next week. Bye. Hey girl, it's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster. I'm a cool podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end. You can find me on Instagram at Therapy with Marissa. Email me, marissa@codependummy.com. Check out codependummy.com for more information on the show. And baby girl, a subscribe, rating, and review would be much appreciated. Till next time, I want you to remember, if you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you think that you don't matter, know that you matter to me. I want you to go out there so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. And now, the disclaimer. Girl, this is not therapy and I am not your therapist. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, or guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional service. If you want or need a professional, please find one.